Good day, guys, and welcome to a bit of a different episode of the podcast. Well, this will be on the podcast on YouTube. I think it's important for me to make this because of what is happening in my country right now. Obviously, as you know, I'm from Venezuela and there is a lot of things on the internet. I thought of giving this a different spin because probably you have heard about the electoral fraud, the problems with the elections, but a part of me thought it is good, obviously, to talk about it, but there are lots of my students, followers or people that just, that interact with me either by the podcast or throughout social media, I don't know, or someone that simply is not from Venezuela and wants to know, or maybe know a little bit more and perhaps hear from someone who is from the country. That's at least what I like to do whenever I want to learn more about a country's situation or a specific problem or subject or issue. I feel it is best to talk to the people from that country, and because of that I thought it will be good to share this with you. Thank you for the mini intro. So this will be a bit different, okay? In the sense that I will not just talk about the fraud. I want to give you a bit of an overview of what people from Venezuela have both experienced and dealt with, in case you have other friends or people that you know from Venezuela, or in case you want to know more. Okay, so buckle up, put on your seatbelt, and let's get ready. In this episode, I'll be touching up on different things that happened throughout Venezuelan history for the past, let's say, 25 years. And the episode could be like hours. I'm not hoping to make it super long, so just bear in mind that I may not touch and explain in great detail lots of the different areas. So with that mini disclaimer, let me take you back to around 1998, 1999, when Hugo Chavez was elected as president. Basically a very charismatic guy, and when you listen to him, or if anyone is curious, you can go and listen to his speeches. He's someone who, had very promising things to the country, saying he was going to make Venezuela great and then basically improve and this and that. And the way he spoke was very appealing. So a lot of people ended up voting for him and everything was okay up until, let's say, the very beginning of his period. And basically what happened was that Chavez started to change his speech, or like the things that he would say. And surprise, surprise, he was not fully doing all the things that he promised. And then he started changing the narrative, let's say, or like his mindset more towards socialism. So he would mention a lot socialism and basically bring that up into his, let's say, candidacy, right? All the things he did as the president. And then it became a bit of a problem when he started doing certain changes in different industries. So around 2002, Venezuela experienced a major, let's say, outbreak, in the sense that a lot of people were protesting against Chavez because he basically wanted to do lots of different changes. Or I could be getting this wrong in terms of the timing, but basically what happened was that a lot of people were not, or let's say lots of people disagreed with what he was doing. And basically they said, no, we are not working. So we had what in Venezuela we call el paro petrolero. So basically people stopped working and a lot of people were basically rebellious against the government. People would go on the streets. And then this is like the beginning of a huge political division in the country, where it was either you go with Chavez or you are against Chavez and you are part of like rich people, or like the group that is anti-government, so to speak. And one of the problems that, let's say, started from that is the division of like families, or not necessarily just families. Like there started to be like a bit of a hatred being bred, in the sense that politics started to become a very sensitive topic. I know that I would argue that in almost any country or anywhere in the planet, politics and sometimes religion can be topics that could be quite confronting, but this got to the point where people would argue on the street, where there will be violence just by hearing that someone goes for the government. So this is probably a big problem, or like the beginning of lots of problems. Obviously, the regime continues up until this day, so you would expect that those protests were not successful. The army would go out and they would throw like gas bombs to try to disperse people from the streets, and then obviously be violent, hitting people, shooting people, and people, and also, I'm not trying to paint the narrative that the protests were super, let's say, we're not like super peaceful. Like some people were like even shooting the government, or when I say the government, sorry, like shooting back to like the police or the national army. So it was like violence from both sides. It's not like the opposition is like angels that did not do anything. But from that protest, a big problem that happened in the country was that a lot of people who used to work for PDVSA, which is like Venezuela's biggest oil producer, which is it's owned by the government. Some people that in that company rebelled against Chavez or that were part of the protest, they were being blacklisted, and then basically they were, let's say, to put it in a very polite way, negatively affected at work. And this is, again, one of the, let's say, the beginning of lots of problems, right? Another thing that happened with Chavez is that anywhere between, let's say, 2002, after that happened, and then basically Chavez winning against those protests, he became even more powerful, and the people that liked him, because there were people who did support him, then they liked him even more, right? Because it's like Chavez, the almighty. But then we have what I just mentioned about the blacklist, and somewhere between 2002 to, let's say, 2008, politics was a big thing. And I think one of the tipping points in terms of the Venezuela turning into a pseudo, I say pseudo because technically speaking Venezuela is a democracy, but pseudo dictatorship is that Chavez chose to close down or shut down, however you want to call it, a TV network called Radio Caracas Televisión, if you're Venezuelan, RCTV, and partially, or like basically the reason why Chavez closed down that whole TV network, TV show, and I think, look, I could be wrong, like maybe any older Venezuelan could correct me if I'm wrong, but probably one of, or if not like the oldest TV channel, or one of the first TV networks channels in the country. And Chavez basically shut them down because they had a segment or like a show where they would criticize the government. And then as soon as that happened, it started to be more like, oh wow, Chavez is not as nice as we thought he was. Now he's bringing in this concept of like socialism. He wanted to then also change the name of the country to República de Venezuela to República Bolivariana de Venezuela, like the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So he always used Simón Bolívar, who, by the way, is basically the guy who fought for Venezuela's freedom. Well, not only Venezuela, but again, this is not a history lesson, right? So I'm not gonna talk too much about Simón Bolívar, but the point I want to make is that he would always mention Simón Bolívar as a symbol, or let's say as a figure, right, of someone who fought for Venezuela's freedom. And he used that to be, let's say, to appeal to people, to basically say like, I am this day and age's Simón Bolívar, so to speak. And well, when that happened, right, when we had that problem of that TV network being cancelled, then the whole politics topic became even more polarizing, right? And this is where you would see an increase, or there was an increase of violence, and it was like a very tense environment. I remember growing up, no one would talk, or you would need to be very careful with who you talk about politics with, because it could be a problem. Like you could go, say for example, to the bakery, and I mean, it's not like you would, it is so tricky to explain, but to put it in simple words, it's like everyone wanted to talk about politics, or there was always an air, like a tense feeling because of the political situation of the country. Because think about it, just the same way how in Australia it's like, hey, how you going, how's things? And people would say, yeah, not too bad, the weather, blah, 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 or whatever is happening at the moment. There was always something to do with politics or to do with Chavez, maybe something he said, something he did, and then basically it was very like uncomfortable because it's like you don't know what to say, or eventually you would need to like know someone quite well to then talk about politics, and if not, then that was a problem. And what I said about families being separated, it's basically because sometimes you would get a scenario where like a dad or a grandpa or someone in a family voted for Chavez, and then the rest of the family would be like, no, we hate you, blah blah blah. And because of politics, they wouldn't talk. And same thing could be said with friendships or like, let's say, relationships at work. Even though, you know, I was a kid when this was happening, so it's hard to say it is like that. This is just my gut feeling. I know for a fact, like with families, because a quick example could be teachers in school. We knew that there were some teachers who voted for Chavez, and it's not like everyone else wouldn't talk to them or anything, but there was a bit of a thing, or like you knew that you wouldn't talk about politics and stuff. So a very sensitive and polarizing topic for us. And with that, what started to happen also was that Venezuela, and I think like lots of countries were like, or are like this, you had the freedom of basically going to a bank or going to go to an exchange rate, let's say, counter, right? And you could exchange your Venezuelan currency, the Bolivar or Bolivares. You could exchange your currency for US dollars, right? This is like probably, you know, internationally speaking, like the most used currency. Well, Chavez changed that. That's another thing that Chavez did. He basically said nobody can get access to US dollars in Venezuela. If you want US dollars, you have to apply to get permission to buy US dollars from the government. And what this did is it basically created a black market in the country. In case you know, look, I haven't checked much of what's happening in Argentina, but from what I've heard, it's similar to what's happening in Argentina with like the exchange rate and all that. So if you know, great, and if you know someone from Argentina, sorry, ask them because maybe they can tell you more. So that's another thing that Chavez did. So basically, again, we are having so far basically violent protests from side to side, not being able to talk openly about the government. And like I said, being blacklisted if you were against the government. Then on top of that, you have no access to foreign currencies. It's not like everyone in Venezuela was rich and you could go to the bank and you would be getting 10 grand every single time or every year, and everyone would go on holidays. But it was just something that people were able to do. Not the getting the 10 grand and going on holidays, but being able to just take X amount of your savings and just exchange money. Simple as that. Like if you wanted to go to Colombia or Brazil or basically any other country, you could go with your Bolivares and exchange it for dollars or pesos, just like you would do basically anywhere. Let's say, for example, I'm based in Australia. So if I want to go to, I would say almost, not any country, but like if you want to go to a foreign country, you could go somewhere with your Aussie dollars and you change the money, right? In Venezuela, then you couldn't do that. You need to like apply for a form to get access to funds. This is another thing that happened. On top of that, Chavez also changed the flag. This is the previous flag from Venezuela, so he chose to change and add an extra star to the flag. And this raised also more, let's say, more controversy within the country, because then the flag thing became also like a symbol of being rebellious, of being against the government. I'm just showing you this because this is like the flag that we had before having Chavez, but that was also a big problem. And talking about what I mentioned of hatred and like people fighting or all these things, it became a big problem, because if you had the flag out, it meant that you follow Chavez. I mean, obviously, if you had this flag, it would be the opposite. It was like a clear way of saying, like, I'm against this guy and everything he's doing to the country. But that was also a big thing that was a bit of a problem. Now, so far, we have lots of like political and social issues, but let's talk about money. As you all probably know, Venezuela made a lot of money, or Venezuela's income is quite high because of petrol. Then another thing that started happening is because we had this black market and we had exports, a lot of businesses would have trouble importing things into Venezuela. So because of that, there was an increase in inflation because it was more expensive for people to bring goods into the country. And well, on top of everything that I have just said, another thing that Chavez did is that he would take businesses, or he would take land from farmers so that it belongs to the state. He would say expropiese, and he would go to like a farm or like a building, and it's like, this is not from whoever, this belongs to the government now. Production, you would expect that if that happens, that the government is going to invest money into whatever building or whatever farm or business it is taking or claiming, however you want to call it, or stealing, doesn't matter. You would expect that at least they would take it and make it better or produce more or something along those lines. Or what he would say, to make things more affordable and stuff. But that's not really what happened. What happened is like production would decrease. So then you would see Venezuela exporting a bunch of products that, it's not like we needed to, but we would be exporting products from Brazil, Argentina, and neighboring countries. And there is nothing wrong with importing products from those countries, but the problem was that we only had, in certain cases, only those products, because there were not that many products made in Venezuela in the first place. So that was also a problem. And this led to a situation where you would go to the supermarket, or you go to a bakery, and there wouldn't be bread, for example. Or like there would be bread, but very, very, very limited amounts. And partially the reason was because there was no flour. So the baker without flour cannot make bread. So then there would be, let's say, the era of scarcity. It is hard to put a time, but let's say, I'm really tempted to say anywhere between 2006 onwards, right? So there was a scarcity with lots of different products. Milk, rice, butter. Think about basic products that you would normally have in your household. It was really tricky to find that. I remember that growing up, it wasn't like I experienced a lot of hardship, but my dad, or like family, let's say, would go out of their way to go to like 3 different supermarkets or like 3 different bakeries to have certain products. Is that like I starved to death? Not precisely, but it was challenging. Like I remember more than once I asked, what is this, for example, what is this butter, or what's that milk? And the response was, that's the milk that was available. I don't even know. I don't even check. I just got whatever we have on the shelf because there's nothing, I'm pretty sure if you know a Venezuelan, you can ask them about because this happened to me, right? Quick break. When we had the COVID pandemic here in the whole world, but in Melbourne, when we had all the scarcity, when there was like no eggs or no milk, no egg, not toilet paper, and like basically very limited amounts of products, that was like almost nostalgic to me, because this is something that it was common. The reverse would be that I had a big shock when I went from having difficulty finding milk, or like very limited amount of milk, and then you come to Australia and you've got like plus 10 types of milk. But that's off topic, so let me continue talking a bit about Venezuela. Then, because of all these reasons, life was very tough. You can't talk about politics, and the situation of the country is not that great. It's not like everyone was like massively suffering, but life was becoming more and more difficult. Then you had this problem with what I just said before in terms of economics, with this black market where people were not able to access foreign currency. And throughout this time, like this is probably like 2006 to, I would say, 2012, it became a bit more difficult getting a passport. But sorry, let me correct myself. I would say that it's probably for the last, I don't know, not even 2006, sorry, 2010 to like 2020 maybe, it was very hard to have a passport. In fact, I had my passport from 2009 up until like, yeah, maybe 2021 or 22. In between some of the lockdowns, I got a new one. And what I would do, maybe for some of you it is normal, but if you are from Venezuela, or like if you know someone from Venezuela, ask them how hard it was to extend your passport, to get a new passport. We would be told that it was very difficult to have a passport, or like there were no products or materials available to make it. So that was also a tricky situation. Like there would be people that perhaps wanted to leave Venezuela, and it's not that they couldn't, but they would have significant delays because one, maybe they had to wait for the passport, or two, they have to wait for the government's approval to get money or to get access to funds, which they still have to pay. So this was, again, like as you probably can tell, is very complex. It's like a lot of things happening. And then probably from 2010 onwards, I would argue or say that this is when lots of Venezuelans started to leave the country because of all these reasons. It's not like life was getting better. Life was getting tougher and tougher, right? For everyone. Like, let's say the middle class was struggling. People that were, let's say, I don't want to say poor, but let's say less well off were also struggling. And there was no real incentive for rich people or businesses to be there because, well, not necessarily no incentive, but there is less incentive, because why would you put a lot of investment into a country where at any time the president can come and say, this company out of the country, or they would just basically shut down a business, or they would just take over a business, right, with this, with what he had done before. So even more polarizing things. Because of all these things, then what happened was that, or like in between all this time, by the way, very important to mention, people from the opposition, the opposition in Venezuela has had different figures. Like I said, just to not make the episode crazy long, there were lots of different faces of the opposition leaders, but what would happen is the government would indirectly or attack them in one way or another. It could either be by putting them to jail. I think a good example of that is Leopoldo Lopez. Google what happened to Leopoldo Lopez and you'll know what I'm talking about. Or it could also be with other people. And it's not only like the top. It could be like, think about people who perhaps want to be governors or people who want to work in councils. So it was like from top level to all the way down to like low levels of government, right? So, and members of parliament too, like people would be targeted and life would be more difficult. It may not necessarily be violence, but it could be like they may have charges against them. They might be imprisoned for whatever reason. Then they would be released. It's not like it was super oppressing, but it would be a constant thing that you would see or hear on the news. So probably from 2010, this sparked even more. So more Venezuelans leaving the country, people then leaving/escaping. That's probably when I would say it started to, at least in my case, at least to me, right, from my experience, it became even more apparent. Growing up, it wasn't a thing of, oh, we should go overseas or we should go or the country's really bad. But the mindset for a lot of Venezuelans started to shift and people were telling themselves, oh, look, this Chavez thing is not good. I remember like hearing from my friends' parents who basically would say we need to leave Venezuela. Like this is like from a second generation or a first generation who were from Europe. Like for example, think about a grandpa from Spain or a grandpa from Portugal. People saying we gotta pack our stuff, we gotta leave because this Chavez thing is not good. It started as early as 2006, but from what I would say, around 2010, it became even more and more serious. More people said, yep, I have to go. And just to give you a quick example, I'm not going to be using, obviously, names for safety reasons and all that, and I'll touch in why I'm not doing this purposely in a second, just to prove a point. But then, think about it this way. In lots of the protests that happened between, let's say, 2006 onwards, Another thing that would happen, remember the blacklist that I said before? What the government would do is if you work in any shape or form for the government, there would be a lot of protest against Chavez. And then if you work for the government, you wouldn't be forced to support Chavez, but they would force you indirectly. So a good example could be my brother working for the council in Caracas, and he was told like, hey, look, what is your t-shirt size? Okay, cool. So we're gonna get you a t-shirt so that you can go and protest, for us. So it's like now you're supporting Chavez. But they wouldn't tell you like, oh, you have to go or you lose your job. But that was like the hidden message. It's like after not going for a few times, you would be asked like, hey, why are you not protesting with us? Why are you not supporting Chavez? Why are you not supporting our comandante, like he used to be called, or like how he called himself? And then with all these things happening, this is just to prove one point. I'm a regular Venezuelan. I'm a regular guy. I'm not rich. I'm not like upper middle class. I'm just normal, if anything, let's say, I guess, middle class, hardworking middle class. So, and this is what I experienced. And I'm pretty sure that almost any Venezuelan that is overseas could tell you that they have had a similar experience in any shape or form. While all these things were happening, another important thing to mention is that the country became more and more violent because of all the problems that I've told you about and other things too. Then it became very unsafe. And I remember, again, growing up, or like when I was like 15, it was normal for me to think like, oh, I'm going to go out to a shopping center, I gotta be super careful, I could get kidnapped or I could get robbed, or someone could rob me and then shoot me or stab me. So you gotta be super, super careful. It's not like it happened to a lot of people, but the country was extremely dangerous. That's the point I'm trying to make. So that was yet another reason that made people think, okay, I should leave Venezuela. So fast forward with all these problems to 2014, we have a crazy inflation. We have a lot of Venezuelans leaving the country. We have people who want to make the country better. And what happened was that in 2014 to 2015, there were massive protests from university students. And then what would happen, and in case you either, you could maybe imagine what I'm about to tell you. The government would again use force, and that's a polite way of saying basically put students in prison, beat them up, and even put a criminal record on their end. Like same thing. We had students or people protesting that maybe they were not super peaceful, but on the flip side, you have got people with guns or like with very hard plastic pellets shooting at you, like with a shotgun. I remember there were people who got shot with that in the eye and they lost their eye, they became blind. Some people got shot with that at such a close distance that they were killed. And those guns are not designed to kill you, but let me tell you, it hurts a lot, It's hard to say, I haven't been shot by that, but it's extremely, extremely painful, right? So they would do that, throw gases, and then naturally, what would you do if someone is shooting at you? I mean, not everyone would get a gun and shoot back, but they would use rocks or try to, defend themselves somehow. So there was obviously that resistance. But because of those protests, what happened was like this this idea of, okay, things will change, maybe we're gonna take down the regime. And quick note, in 2014, Chavez was not with us because he passed away in 2013. So what Chavez did before dying is he said, look, I won't be here that soon, or I won't be here, I'm about to pass away. Now, please go and vote for Nicolás Maduro, who is Venezuela's current president, basically. So he's like, instead of voting for me, or instead of having me, now you will have Nicolás Maduro. So he's gonna be like the new face of the country and basically like Simón Bolívar's son. So follow him. So then Chavez passed away and we had all these other problems. And another added layer of problem, or complexity if you wish, is that the way Chavez talked, remember how I told you he was very appealing? that even if you hated him, it's like, or like even if you didn't agree with that what he said, you're like, damn, that sounds good, or not necessarily good, but like the way he said it, he was so, let's say, I guess convinced is a good way to put it, that it sounded good. Like the way he spoke was, you know, he spoke not the, let's say, when I say he spoke well, I mean, he wasn't very polite lots of times, but that's another story. Then a problem with Maduro is like he was the complete opposite. It's like almost every other speech or every other day, whatever he said, whatever came out of his mouth was either something that it wasn't very good, or it didn't make any sense, or people would make a joke out of it. So then people were like, okay, Chavez is not in power. Why do we need to listen to this guy? Then we had all the protests because of all the problems that I told you before. And then that's when the army started really, you know, pushing, hurting students, killing people, right? Students and people who protested. And then from that quick example, I remember I was scrolling on Facebook like we all do, you know, checking social media at the time. And I saw the photo of a friend of mine who happened to be taken by the army. And like I just told you, he got beaten up. He was put in jail for like a day or two. And when he was released, he was told that he's got a criminal record. And if he's ever caught protesting against the government again, he would be put in jail straight away. And yeah, that's just a polite way of saying like your life is ruined, basically. And like I said, another regular dude like me, no one special, not like his parents were the opposition leaders or anything like that. Regular day-to-day bloke person, yeah? So big problem, because then we've got all the students being affected. Unfortunately, with all these things happening, you know, with the people being oppressed again, then it was like this air of, okay, we are defeated, these guys are not going, even though Maduro, we don't like him, let's say, or even though he's not as charming as Chavez is, then anyways, he's gonna stay basically because the army is too powerful. So then we have the crisis from 2016 to 2018. We, like I told you, we were super violent. Venezuela was, you know, I would argue in the top 5 most violent / dangerous countries in the planet for a long time. And it's like we love being in the top 10 of bad things because we had that. Then, remember what I said about blocking people the access of foreign currency and the black market that I mentioned before? Basically, what would happen is that because of that, things would increase. Not only because of that, but then you have that plus the problem with the drop or the decrease in petrol prices. So the country was not getting in the same amount of money as before, duh. And then what would happen is inflation would skyrocket to the roof. I always give this example in class, but just to give you, I guess, a rough idea of how much in Venezuelan currency things increased, and this could even be more. It's almost like, imagine if a cup of coffee is $5, okay? I'm gonna use Australian dollar for this example. But again, it's gonna be way crazier with Venezuela. Imagine today a cup of coffee is $5 and that in 12 months time, in a year's time, the same cup of coffee costs you 1,500. Crazy, right? Welcome to Venezuela's inflation. So then we started having a crisis, but using our currency bolívares, because the inflation was so high, or in other words, the value of our currency was so low, or it dropped so much that people needed to weigh the money. So it's like you have a stack of cash and you say, okay, I need to buy a few arepas or whatever you have to buy. And then you're like, okay, I don't know, give me 3 arepas and I don't know, 1 Malta and a drink. And then, you know, you would be told, oh, look, it's like 5 million, but, or like, I don't know, 10 million, a crazy number, when we used to be charged in like 10,000, 15,000. So then it's like you have to have a big stack of cash, people have to check the weight, and that's how you would pay for things. So then this created more dependency on the US dollar, and again, the value of the currency just significantly dropping, leading to even more problems. And you might be wondering, in case you know someone from Venezuela, like, how did people there survive? I don't know, but the real answer is it would be a mix of people having like 2 to 3 jobs or trying to survive in some way or another with any form of investment. asking for friends and family for things. A very common thing was obviously, I would argue or say that most Venezuelans that I know, personally speaking, have in one way or another, shape or form, either given money, sent support by buying a product or doing something to help people in Venezuela or their family, because it's so hard to live there. It got to the point with inflation and scarcity that when people would travel, this is again, let's say between 2012 onwards, but especially like around 2015 to 2018, whenever people went on a holiday, what would happen is you would ask your relatives, or like you would be told, it's like, hey, I'm going on holiday for whatever reason, or like I'm gonna go to a different state, and people would ask you, hey, bring some harina pan, corn flour, bring some milk, or bring this. So it wasn't like, oh, bring me a souvenir, or bring me this special dish that we have in that region. It was like, no, please bring deodorant, please bring all these products that were like basic products. Yeah. Imagine asking a cousin or someone in your family or a friend who's going to a different city, hey, can you bring some deodorant for me? And I don't mean it in a joke or in any way. This is like actual things that happened. Another thing that happened is that like the value of money decreased so much so that people would trade things. So it's almost like going backwards in time. Instead of being like, oh, I've got all these, let's say, harina pan, or this corn flour, or all of these, whatever product, right? Instead of being like, oh, I'm gonna sell this to you for this much, some people would say, look, I'll give you harina pan and you give me toothpaste and and deodorant. But then this also created another problem, but oh my God, I'm getting confused. I hope that you are following through, and I hope that you so far, get a good idea of what's happening. But talking about the products, another thing that Chavez did is he created a supermarket that is, let's say, of easier access to all these things. Because remember, we have crazy high inflation, so people are struggling to buy things. But what he did is he would basically set up a new supermarket, or a supermarket funded by the government, where you would buy products at a very cheap rate. But then what people would do is, because people were really struggling, people would line up from like 4, 3, 2 a.m. the night before, go to that supermarket, buy everything at half price, and then resell the products to people that maybe were not doing so badly, or like people that were struggling but maybe not so much. So what you would do is contact people that you knew that they would go and buy products, and then you would pay them like a cheaper rate than the expensive supermarkets or like the expensive inflation rate. So it created like a bit of a bubble for basic needs products, which is again very complicated. And at the same time, while all of this is happening, remember, very polarizing. It's like if you are either with them or you are not. So very, very tricky to handle. And remember, all throughout this time, people that were against the government, they were being, like I said, incarcerated, put in prison, etc., etc., etc. Or somehow they would magically stop being there. So how does all of that relate to what is happening right now? Before I tell you, I guess the last example is that we have a guy, there is a Venezuelan named Juan Guaido. That was another problem that we had. And it is that basically, after many years of having the government, they basically lost power in the parliament, okay? And in the Venezuelan constitution, there is a law that Juan Guaido became the vice president, okay? And there is apparently a law that said that there are times that if under certain conditions, the vice president can become the president, and the president needs to stop being the president. And by the way, before I forget, in case I haven't mentioned this, or maybe I'm repeating myself, but Chavez also changed the constitution. That was a big thing. So we went from having the option of being re-elected once for 2 periods, right? Like, let's say, for example, in the US, in America, right? You can be a president once, you can be a president once again, and that's it, bye-bye, thank you, someone else. Chavez changed that in the constitution. So he said anyone can be re-elected as many times as possible. In case you are wondering why, we couldn't, let's say, vote them out, right? So what happened with this guy, Juan Guaido, was that when the parliament said, look, because now the parliament had a bit more power. So at that time, this would be, I'll have to double check my facts, but probably around 2018 and before COVID, in between those years, when this happened, the parliament probably had something like, let's say, 60% opposition. So the parliament, rather than just accepting whatever the government said, the parliament was checking more, right? All the laws and things they would pass or do, that it wouldn't always be in the government's favor. It's not like it would always be against, but they were like, let's say, being more partial, which is what they have to do in the first place. But anyways. And then when they said, look, Juan Guaido, the vice president, should be the president and Maduro shouldn't be the president, out of the blue, the old parliament leader from the government, he basically went up and said, you know what we're doing? We're having a new parliament. And then Maduro, I think he also said on national TV, like, hey, you know what? The old parliament, forget it. That doesn't count. The one that we had for, almost 20 years, roughly, or like, I don't know, 15 to 20 years, that doesn't count anymore. Surprisingly, this was right at the time when they lost power there, because obviously a lot of the things that the government has done is obviously against human rights and obviously not good. So anyways, when that happened, they made like a new parliament, and then they said, we're not using this anymore, now we just go with this other new parliament. And guess what? Almost the whole parliament, or like 90% plus, was from, you guessed it correctly, from the government. So things kept going the same way. Then, well, we've got all these problems, and to add up to this, maybe around this time when we had the crisis, or just before I touch up on what is happening today, another important note. Because a lot of Venezuelans started to leave the country, we started experiencing the biggest exodus in history. Up to, or let's say, fast forward to 2024, there are 8 million Venezuelans that are outside Venezuela. I am one of them, so I'm just a regular guy in, the whole planet out of 8 million that is somewhere outside Venezuela. There are a lot of Venezuelans everywhere, and because the situation started getting so bad, people would like literally escape, like just go walking, just to go to Colombia, just to get into Brazil, just to go into any neighboring country. And this also created a problem because the situation in Venezuela got so bad, and I'm sure you guys know, for those of you listening, this got so bad that even the bad people, even like the gangsters or like the gangs, they also left Venezuela. So Venezuela all of a sudden became safe. And it became safe because, again, all these bad people, they were going to some of your countries, like a lot of gangs going to like Colombia, to Peru, to Chile. And that's obviously like, imagine how bad all this has to be, that even they move and they go out of the country. So then this created like this sort of like racism towards Venezuelans. And again, this could even be another episode. A lot of the things I'm talking about, could be an episode on their own. But this is just to show yet another problem from all these things about the government, right? Venezuelans leaving, and you have regular dudes like me, or maybe people that are maybe more related in one way or another to the government, up to the point like the gangs. And that also created a problem because then Venezuelans were also, some of us were not maybe doing the nicest things. Like there are videos of Venezuelans mocking Ecuadorians or people from Panama based on how they say certain things, which, obviously I'm not proud of that. I'm not claiming that, oh, we are the angels of South America and, everyone is now mistreating us. No, obviously there is Venezuelans that have been doing bad things. And obviously I disagree with that. I think that if you go to a country, the least you could do is respect their traditions, their rules, the way they do and say things. Obviously, you could say, oh, in my country we say it differently. But there are people going up to the point of making fun of them publicly like this on the internet. And obviously, I completely disagree with that, But with all that happening and with the problem with the potential new president, then yet again, there was like another win for Maduro's regime. We have COVID and the situation obviously getting worse and worse. And now up until 2024, what is happening this year, or what happened, I should say. So we've got a few things. One is that the current opposition leader, like the face of the opposition, is a lady called Maria Corina Machado, right? Or Maricori, Maria Corina, right? And then I'll have to, again, double check everything to be, I want to be fully transparent. I don't know exactly when, but before the elections, relatively close to the elections, Maduro and his government just basically said, Maria Corina, who's the opposition leader, cannot participate in the next presidential elections because they would give you a reason, but the reason would be very, she's not following, or like she did something that was not part of the process, or she broke some laws or rules, or they would just make something up so that she cannot be there. So what is happening, you have people that don't like the government. Obviously there might be, I don't think too many, to be honest, but there might be people who like the government. But then the government says, you know what, this person, the opposition leader, no, you cannot vote for that person. Another problem, right? Then what she did is she said, okay, I cannot vote, and she's trying to be as peaceful and probably as legal, as polite as possible. So what she did in her power was similar to what Chavez did. Is like, guys, or like, basically saying to people in Venezuela, look, you cannot vote for me. However, instead of voting for me, you could vote for Edmundo Gonzalez, who is like the person that is against, or sorry, not against, but it's like the new face of the opposition. So everyone said, okay, no worries. Now, instead of voting for Maria Corina, we're going to vote for Edmundo Gonzalez. Then the elections continued. There were other candidates, obviously nowhere near as relevant as these two, because it was, again, government versus opposition, or however, opposition versus government. So we go to the elections, and another important thing that I probably should have mentioned earlier is that ever since like Chavez's time, this is like 20 years ago plus, whenever we did the elections, we used to do them in paper, so you grab a piece of paper, you basically sign, rip it off, and then you vote, right? From my understanding, and excuse my ignorance, but a lot of countries do it this way. You just get a piece of paper and then you vote. But Venezuela, no. What we do is we use a machine to vote, right? Beep, 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 and you vote. And this is from over 15 years ago. Increasing the likelihood or the chances of fraud. Is there fraud? I'll let you and history judge or say that. And the same thing happened now. So the problem is that I guess this time there has been some improvements in terms of like how people can monitor the votes, that there were lots of volunteers throughout the country. There was this air or this gasp of there might be freedom now in the country that was, let's say out there. So there was hope. There was also people in the opposition who were like, there's no way we're gonna win. We have been bashed, killed, and basically beaten up for so many years. Nothing will change. These guys are just doing what they have done before. And probably rightly so, it makes sense, I'm not gonna come up here to criticize or anything. It's a tough situation, because going back to what I told you, me, one of my friends, being beaten up and going to prison, what am I gonna tell the guy? Oh bro, I'm from here in Australia, like in a first world country, relaxing in a place where I know nothing can happen to me from the government directly, right? It's not like someone is gonna come and attack me. I cannot be like, oh man, yeah, you should go and protest, knowing that he's been to jail, that maybe someone who he knows or people that he knows have been either shot or affected or hurt or also have a criminal record like him. So it's a tricky position, even for people that are outside of Venezuela. But anyways, the thing is that when the votings happened this year, when people went to vote, there were more volunteers than ever. Something that is important to mention, because with previous elections, there used to be a few elections, especially with like governors, where basically people lost hope. It was something like the government winning by 80% plus. Was there fraud? Yes, no, maybe. That's not a big thing now, but the point is that people lost hope. But this time was the opposite. It's like, okay, let's go and vote for Edmundo. Let's go for a change. There were times where another thing that I didn't mention is that there would be like armed groups paid by the government called colectivos, or referred to as colectivos, that would go and like basically sabotage. They would like either do something to the machines, or they would like beat people up, or they would scare people so less people in an area go to vote. And then basically what would happen this time, this is again, I'm paraphrasing what some people have said or put on the internet, people that seemed to be like a gang that was going to basically disturb the voting that was happening actually were against the government. So they were joining the opposition. So you would see that throughout all this time, lots and lots of people have been going from following Chavez and Maduro and the socialism idea and all that. They have been turning into people that want a change in Venezuela. Now it's not even a point of the opposition or left or right wing. It's more like a change. It's like people are tired of everything that is happening. So with all these volunteers and all these people checking, it turns out that there is a high chance that finally we may win because of statistics and by checking the recent polls and everything. And from memory, the latest statistic is that the opposition leader this time, Edmundo, was going to win something like he was going to get around 75%. Yeah? But then it turns out that was like the expected or like the official result. But then what happened was that when the government announced the results, they said something crazy and flipped it up. And instead of being like 75% opposition, 25% for Nicolas Maduro, it was more like, 60% plus for Maduro and then less for this other candidate. And this is what sparked what is happening now. Lots of protests, people being obviously angry, and it's tricky because we have this situation where, like I told you, there are protests, but people in Venezuela know, and people overseas know that they can get hurt. The army has been, again, shooting people. It is very tricky. It is a very tricky spot to be. And again, for example, I'm thinking about friends or people that I know that are there, and it's a problem because people want to protest, but I'm outside and I'm scared. A part of me is like, what if I get a phone call or a text message that someone that I know has been shot because they were protesting? So obviously a part of me is like, it will be, I think the protest maybe is nice, but I don't want people to be protesting to get shot. So that's, the situation that we're dealing with now. So all in all, it is hard to say what's going to happen. I hope that this video is both a mix of informative, giving you a bit of a pinch of Venezuelan history at what is happening. This is maybe a way of telling all my students or people that are here in Australia a bit about what is happening. And interestingly enough, someone said to me like, "Oh, Emilio, you're really famous here in Melbourne with the Latino community and that." I really don't think so, but I thought, look, if I am someone famous, it will be good, or at least for people that ask me, people that maybe have a partner who is Latino, or maybe someone who is from Venezuela and you want to know a bit more. Or sometimes, rightly so, people ask me and they just want to double check whatever they see on the internet. I hope that this video gives you both a good overview of what is happening and basically that it helps you understand a bit more what's happening. It is, like I said before, it is a tricky spot. Big thank you to everyone that is in my network, because I've had students, acquaintances, friends, people close to me basically checking up on me. I'm not gonna lie, it's not like, oh, it's been so easy to talk about this. And on the flip side, it's not also like, oh my God, this is so tough, because like I told you, I'm in the comfort of a first world country, but it is a tricky position because I still love my country. But it's like, would you like a change? Yes. Do I want to get shot? No. So it is a really tough spot to be. And well, I guess that's probably a good way to wrap up the episode. If you do have any questions, do let me know. The next episode will be more like the podcast. That's why I purposely did not put a number in the episode. This is more just as a way to inform the masses, people on the internet, what has been happening, and a bit of a summary of history. Like I said, I would highly recommend doing also your own research and double checking things, because there is a lot of things that I sprinkled in this video that, again, it could be like a whole episode on its own. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being with me. Feel free to share this with someone that perhaps wants to know a bit more about Venezuela, or if you want to raise awareness. And I guess this is like one of the things that we can do to show the world what is happening. Hopefully, United Nations or maybe one of those organizations, hopefully something will happen. I don't know what it is, but like we said with soccer, mano, tengo fe, which literally means like, bro, I have faith. The same way, like I would say, millions of Venezuelans, I have faith that, you know, there will be a change. I really hope it is a positive change. And another last bit to say, it is that another thing that is very interesting is that with these elections, a lot of Venezuelans overseas, including me, did not vote. And I'm gonna tell you why I did not vote. Well, one is because I didn't know anything about the registration process. It was not clear from, let's say, people on my end on how we are supposed to register or how are we supposed to vote. I mean, in previous elections, what we would be told is like, oh, you have to go to Canberra. But interestingly enough, or surprisingly, however you want to call it, or by coincidence, in these elections, the Venezuelans that were overseas, they had very tight deadlines to register. So I would lie to you if I come up here and I tell you exactly when it was. But hypothetically speaking, it would be something like I had between the 15th of January to the 15th of February to register in Canberra for these elections, making it very hard and without you being told. So it's almost like if you are overseas and you vote, you have to actively be searching and finding out how you can get registered and how you can vote, which is something that, I mean, like I said, I'm a regular dude. I have been saying that in the whole episode. There is a lot of people like me that had that same issue. There are other people that for whatever reason or for travel reasons, they maybe don't have the chance to register and then they couldn't vote. And what makes this such a big thing is that, again, we have 8 million people, and it's hard to say how many did not vote, but let me tell you, my guess is that at least half of all the Venezuelans outside of Venezuela did not vote. And again, this is a bold statement or prediction, but I think it is highly likely to assume that they would not vote for Maduro, because a lot of us, we are outside of Venezuela because of the regime in the first place. Another thing that I think is important to mention is, even though I don't feel famous, another tricky thing that is very complicated is like influences or things that you see in social media. A lot of the people you might see in social media doing what I'm doing right now, they're basically putting themselves at risk, because if a lot of the influencers, especially like, I mean, I am not gonna say names to keep it very professional, but lots of comedians and people that have been related to politics in one way or another that are Venezuelan are currently overseas and they cannot go back to Venezuela. There is, for example, a case of a very famous influencer, and this guy made a video, it went viral, and it had some joke about the government. Now he has an arrest order. And he publicly said that the army went to his house to like find him. Then he had to escape the country, knowing that if he ever goes back to Venezuela, as soon as the plane lands in Caracas or anywhere, but let's say Caracas, and as soon as he goes to customs and gives his passport, stamp, boom, straight to jail, no questions asked. So there is a lot of Venezuelans facing that. I think personally it is unlikely. I'm nowhere near as big as this guy that I'm talking to you about. He probably had back then, I don't know, like 500,000 followers. I'm a baby in terms of social media, but you would see people on social media putting themselves out there, and it is tricky because if you do that, there is a chance, especially if you're in Venezuela, that something bad will happen to you or someone that you know, or that the way you live is going to be affected negatively. I think that doesn't need an explanation because of everything that I've said before. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Feel free to share it. And well, with all that said, next episode would be more like the regular podcast. I hope you liked this episode. Feel free to leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. And once again, thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to me as a Venezuelan who's overseas. And well, as always, take care, miss me, I'll miss you, and I'll see you on the next episode. Take care and bye for now. See ya.